Let's talk about this past week's episode of Dark Side of the Ring. It was on Chris Kanyon. And, of course, we had Evan Husney on last week and previewed a lot of the episodes. And this one we talked about. James Mitchell, Daryl Van Horn, to me, was the star of this program. He was just, and everything he said, folks, I hadn't heard the story of him finally having to pull the gun on Kanyon. I hadn't heard that one, or quite the extent of the ways that Chris would go off sometimes in James's presence, but I'd heard the box of questionable material story years ago from Mitchell, and he didn't betray a confidence. It wasn't until after that, we knew that Chris was gay, because as I mentioned, I think on one of the programs we talked about it, I never knew, and most people didn't know until he decided to come out. But anyway, the point I was going to make was that everything that James said was pretty much true. And, I think he made the program giving that kind of close, a firsthand account of the ways that Chris could, fluctuate between the nicest guy in the world and, depression and what's wrong, what's going on. So, I thought it was good. I liked Kanyon so much. He was a great wrestler. He just never got in a spot particularly where that I think probably the biggest spot that he got where he was featured was the Mortis thing, right?
Actually, I think he got featured even more in WCW after that, to be honest.
I tell it, yeah, and then they brought back Who Better Than Kanyon, but that's when there was a lot of chaos going on, and I don't know that I saw all those programs during that era. But, he was a great wrestler. It's just, I hate that he had, he felt especially, secretive, reticent for anybody to find out what was going on. And it tortured him mentally, as you could tell throughout the whole program. But he was always trying to help guys in the ring and help people in the ring. I've said many times that, he worked in OVW and was completely selfless and didn't care about putting, the younger guys over just because he'd been on TV. And even when they wouldn't send him, sometimes he wanted to come just to stay in shape and to contribute to our show, since they weren't putting him on theirs. And I got to be honest, I think even one time he was in a program with Johnny Jeter, and I had let him come up with a lot of the nuts and bolts of it, because it was to put Jeter over, and he did magnificently. But I'm pretty sure that he even came back to finish that one time on his own nickel, because they were going to bring him back up and they weren't sending him to OVW or whatever the case. And he came back on his own. And as I recall, the match he had with Jeter on TV, it would have fit right on Raw in that era. It was that good, because he was motivated not only to show what he could do, but to help other guys. And, I have no explanation. I'd heard about the Boy George thing, but I'd never seen it, because I didn't watch the fucking WWF show at that period of time, because it hurt my brain. I was doing OVW, and every time I'd watch who we were supposed to be in service for at that time period, it would hurt me. So I'd heard about it, but I'd never seen it. And it was even worse seeing it than when I heard about it. Do you remember or have any context as to how that was presented that wouldn't just be just to fuck with him? And would it have fit in the story they were doing at the time in any other way, unless, hey, let's just fuck with this guy because he's got heat with us. We found out he's gay and we want to just fuck with him? Because even Heyman was involved in that. And I know now he's Teflon and he doesn't get any on him. But back in those days, he didn't have a lot of fans in Stephanie and people like that anyway. So what was the point of that whole thing? Do you remember?
I don't think there was any point to it. And when you see it, it was for me too. Actually, it was the first time I ever saw that. I didn't even know about the whole lisp, the exaggerated lisp while he was singing. That was the first time I had ever seen that or heard any audio from it. And it was much worse than I thought, especially that chair shot at the end. I don't know how you could see that with any knowledge of Kanyon's career and everything he had ever done on camera, on national TV. Nothing that would lead you to think that he should do Boy George impersonations on TV. There's nothing that would lead you to think this was anything but a punishment to him. For something.
And that was just ridiculous. And, you know, I think that may have been something also. He didn't have a lisp, you know, like they were trying to get him to portray, but he not only had that really heavy New York accent. Sorry, Brian, you don't. I mean, his was heavy, but also he had, I don't even know if it was a lisp or just, it was an unusual, what's the word I'm searching for?
A speech impediment.
Speech impediment. I mean, he could speak normally, he wasn't stuttering or whatever, but there was something that was there. And maybe some people thought that was a hindrance in promos. I don't know, but as I said, whenever I was in charge of anything that he was involved in, I didn't have a problem in the world with him, and he was always dedicated and great. And fortunately, when he showed up in OVW, he didn't have, you would have never known that guy had the depression or the outbursts or any of the other things that goes along with, whatever mental illness that he was dealing with. You would not have known that from interacting with him at the matches or at TV tapings or whatever. But at least, and then there was controversy again, and Flair actually came out and said it on Twitter this last week when they had John Cena and they had Flair on Howard Stern to basically knock Chris when he'd gone on the deal that after he decided he wanted to come out openly, then he thought that he'd get something, I think, out of that with with going on a somewhat of a anti-WWE promo tour. And that's when they had, and Flair confirmed it, they would have guys go out and fucking defend the company against people who were doing shit like that. And
yeah, go watch all the TV after the Chris Benoit thing and see some of the people that out of nowhere were defending the company. It was bizarre. Because
they were telling him to do it. So I think that, I mean, Flair had room to talk on who's a great wrestler or not. John, you could tell when he was saying it, you just weren't good enough. I think that's just basically what they told him to say, because he kind of would have known that technically Chris was a better wrestler than he is.
And I don't think Flair was right either, because he was really good. He's someone who got himself over, even with his speech impediment on the mic, with his New York lisp, got himself over, worked hard. He was good. I'm not saying Flair was right. He was good. I'm just saying, at least if you're Ric Flair, you've got, because he wasn't better than Flair was in Flair's day. So at least you've got room to criticize somebody. But he was better than John as a performer in the ring, just not as a promo or a personality. So John might have been especially a poor one to say, well, you weren't good enough. Anyway. James Mitchell was great, though. I liked him so much. I wish he was Canadian so they could make him the host of the show.
That would be great if he had that voice narrating everything. He is.
Yeah.
And he's got such a great delivery, and he's got that sardonic quality sometimes in his voice.
Bruiser Bedlam blew up a police station. He'd be great. Come on, he'd be wonderful on there.
He could be the Walter Winchell of Dark Side of the Ring. Late that night in the WCW locker room. They were plotting the overthrow of Eric Bischoff.
It'll be better than Jericho slowly reading whatever's been put in front of him. What the hell? Oof.
Well, but he does have the Canadian
tax break. That's the word you're looking for?
The Canadian tax. That's when Jericho comes in. Well, there's our little tax deduction. Anyway, but closing thoughts on the Kanyon episode, though. I've said what I've, basically I hate that he went through that. I hate that happened to him. He was a great guy. I thought it was a good episode on him. It's nice to see him get some attention. The Hardley Boys being on there just because they were fans of his. Well, I guess they could have gotten any fans, but they were passing by the Hardley Boys place in Cucamonga. I don't know what they really had to do with it otherwise than that. But Brian Cage. You could say Brian Cage, when he's working with Kanyon, he weighed like 187 pounds. But what'd you think otherwise?
Yeah, I'm not a Young Bucks fan, but I didn't mind them overall. There were a few spots I thought what they were saying was a little silly, but overall I thought I didn't mind them because in a way it reminded me of stuff you'd hear about Tracy. I like that they pointed out that this is a guy that whatever he was going through at the end, he was helping young guys. Whatever we want to say about Brian Cage or the Young Bucks or anyone else.
Yeah.
He was actually going out there trying to help guys. And I don't know. There's something really nice about that. There's always something about the guy who's a real fan before he breaks into the business that you could always tell throughout their life and throughout their time in the business that they were a really big fan before they got into it. And he was one of those guys.